Kethver lifted his glass of kelp wine to his lips. The blue liquid burned as it went down his throat. Around him in the dark cantina, young soldiers from different planets leaned forward in their chairs. They wanted to hear his stories. They always did. "You want to know about humans," Kethver said slowly. His voice was rough from years of breathing recycled air on warships. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." He set his glass down on the metal table. The sound echoed in the quiet room. Outside the cantina windows, stars moved slowly past as the space station turned. This was a safe place. A neutral zone, but Kethver remembered when nowhere was safe. "It started on Arcturus Prime," he began. 3 years into the war. We had been winning. Our forces were bigger. Our weapons were better. Our ships were faster. The humans were losing ground everywhere. A young Centauri soldier raised his hand. "But humans are weak. They die easy. How could they be a threat?" Kethver laughed. It was not a happy sound. "That's what we thought too. We were wrong." He picked up his glass again, but didn't drink. Instead, he stared into the blue liquid like he could see the past in it. Arcturus Prime was a mining planet, rocky, cold, not much to look at, but it had rare metals we needed for our ships. The humans had built a research station there, underground, deep underground. The alien soldiers around the table nodded. They knew about human research stations. Everyone did. We surrounded the place with 3 divisions, 15,000 soldiers. The humans had maybe 300 people down there. Most of them were scientists. We figured it would be easy. Send a message, tell them to give up. When they refused, we would wait, cut off their supplies. They would surrender in a few days. Kethver drank again. The wine was getting to him now. His memories were getting clearer, and that was not good. Colonel Jake Morrison was in charge. Down there. I still remembered his voice on the radio, calm, friendly, like he was talking to old friends instead of enemies. He told us we could wait up here as long as we wanted. He said his people were comfortable. "Comfortable?" asked a young vegan recruit, but they were trapped. No way out. "No supplies coming in." "That's what we thought," Kethver said. "We were wrong about that too." He stood up and walked to the window. The stars looked peaceful from here. But he remembered when they looked different, when they looked like the eyes of hunters. The first week was quiet. We watched their power levels. They were using less energy every day. We thought they were running out of fuel. We thought they were getting weak. Morrison kept talking to us on the radio, asking about our families, our home planets, like we were having dinner together instead of fighting a war. Kethver turned back to face the group. His skin had changed color slightly. It always did that when he was stressed. In the second week, strange things started happening. Our patrols near the entrance started getting sick. Nothing serious. Just headaches, upset stomachs. Our medics said it was probably the planet's atmosphere, different air than we were used to. He sat back down. The chair creaked under his weight. By the 3rd week, the sickness was getting worse. Soldiers were passing out on duty. Some were having trouble breathing. Our doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. The air readings were normal. The water was clean. Food was fine. A Zephyrian lieutenant leaned forward. "Poison?" we thought. But how? They were trapped underground. We controlled everything above ground. There was no way for them to poison us. Kethver's hands shook slightly as he picked up his glass. The young soldiers noticed, but didn't say anything. Then we found out about Lieutenant Lisa Chang. She was their engineer. 26 years old. Human female, small, quiet. She looked like she couldn't hurt anyone. He paused and looked around. The table? All the young faces were watching him, waiting. Chang had been working in their waste processing system. You understand what that means? Human waste, garbage, things they threw away. She had been down there for weeks, working with pipes and filters and pumps. What was she doing? Asked the Centauri, making weapons, Kethver said simply. The humans call it aggressive recycling. Chang had figured out how to turn everything they didn't need into things that could kill us. He stood up again and began pacing. It helped him think. Helped him remember details he wished he could forget. Human waste contains chemicals. Dangerous chemicals if you know how to use them, Chang knew. She had been converting their sewage into poison gas. Then she found a way to pump it up through the rock, into our water supply, into the air we breathed. The room was very quiet now. Even the background noise from the space station seemed muted. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how she did it. The facility's life support system was connected to the planet's natural cave network. Chang had been mapping those caves for weeks, learning how air moved through them, how water flowed. Cuthbert stopped pacing and looked directly at the young vegan recruit. She turned the entire planet into a weapon. Every breath we took, every drop of water we drank, it was all contaminated, and we never knew until it was too late. How many died? The vegan asked quietly. In the first month? Maybe 50, not from the poison directly. The levels were too low for that. But soldiers got weak. Made mistakes. Some fell off cliffs. Others walked into energy fields. A few just disappeared. Cuthbert sat down heavily. His shoulders sagged like he was carrying something very heavy. Morrison kept talking to us on the radio every day. He would ask about our sick soldiers. Offered to send up medical supplies. Said his people had extra medicine they didn't need. Did you take it? No, we weren't stupid. But Morrison kept offering. He was always polite. Always helpful. And every day, more of our soldiers got sick. The alien soldiers around the table exchanged glances. They were starting to understand why Cuthbert looked so tired. In the 6th week, we decided to storm the facility. We couldn't wait anymore. Too many soldiers were sick. Command was getting angry. They wanted results. Cuthbert picked up his glass but set it down without drinking. His hands were shaking more now. We went in through the main entrance. 300 soldiers in full combat gear, the best troops in the division. We expected heavy resistance. Gun battles, explosions. What we found was worse. He looked around the table again. The young soldiers were hanging on every word. The facility was dark, quiet. Our scanners showed human life signs, but they were all in the deepest levels. We thought maybe they were hiding, scared we were wrong again. Cuthbert stood up and walked back to the window. Space looked the same as always, cold, dark, empty, but he knew better now. The humans had been busy. The entire facility was a trap. Every corridor, every room, every piece of equipment. They had turned their own home into a weapon designed to kill anyone who came inside. What kind of traps? Asked the Zephyrian lieutenant. Everything. Floors that collapsed into pits full of sharp metal. Walls that sprayed acid. Doors that exploded when you opened them, and the smell. Cuthbert's skin changed color again. This time it went almost white. The humans had been using their dead. Their own people who died from injuries or sickness. They turned the bodies into weapons, booby traps, psychological warfare. The cantina was completely silent now except for the hum of the space station's engines. We lost 200 soldiers in the first hour. The humans never fired a shot. They just watched us die in there. Traps. And Morrison kept talking on the radio, giving us directions to the medical bay, telling us where we could find bandages and medicine. Cuthbert turned away from the window. His eyes looked very old. When we finally reached the lowest level, we found them, all 97 humans who were still alive. They were sitting in their command center, drinking coffee, playing card games. Morrison looked up when we came in and smiled. What did he say? He asked if we wanted some coffee. Sighed. They had plenty to share. Cuthbert finished his second glass of wine and looked around the cantina. The young soldiers were still listening, still waiting for more stories. He could see the questions in their eyes. They wanted to know if humans were really that dangerous. You think that story was bad, he said slowly. That was just the beginning. Humans get worse when they're desperate. Much worse, he called for another drink. The serving robot brought it quickly. In places like this, everyone knew to leave old soldiers alone when they were drinking. especially soldiers who had fought humans. 6 months after Arcturus Prime, I was transferred to the Kepler sector. Deep Space Patrol. My job was to hunt down human ships that were trying to escape the war zones. Command thought it would be easy work. Humans were losing, their fleets were scattered. Most of their ships were damaged or destroyed. A young Marduk. Ensign raised his hand, but space is big. How do you find ships that don't want to be found? Usually you don't, Kethver said. But humans are different. They leave trails, heat signatures, energy emissions, radio signals. Most species try to run silent when they're hiding. Humans talk to each other. They can't help it. He took a sip of his fresh drink. This one was stronger than the others. He needed it to be stronger. We were patrolling near the Kepler Nebula when our sensors picked up something strange. A ship, dead in space, no power. No life signs, just drifting. The alien soldiers leaned forward in their chairs. They could tell this story was going to be different from the first one. Our computers identified it as the UES Liberator, heavy cruiser. Captain Roy Hendricks commanding. The ship had been reported destroyed 3 months earlier during the Battle of Procyon, but here it was, floating in the void like a ghost. Kethver set his glass down carefully. His hands were steadier now. Sometimes the alcohol helped with the memories. My commander wanted to ignore it. Dead ships were common in that sector. The humans and coalition forces had been fighting there for months. Space was full of wrecks. But something felt wrong about this one. Wrong how? Asked a vegan communications officer. The ship was too clean, too intact. When ships die in battle, they show damage. Holes in the hull, broken parts floating around them. Debris fields. The Liberator looked like it had just been turned off. Kethver stood up and walked to the window again. Outside, a human cargo ship was docking with the station. He watched it for a moment before continuing. We scanned the ship for 6 hours. No energy readings, no heat signatures, no atmosphere. The hull was intact, but everything inside was dead. Our sensors showed no life signs anywhere on the ship. He turned back to face the group. His expression was serious now. Command ordered us to board her. Salvage mission? Human ships had good technology, weapons, computers, medical supplies. Even if the crew was dead, the ship might be useful. Did you want to board it? Asked the Marduk ensign. No, Kethver said simply. Something felt wrong. But orders are orders. I was just a lieutenant then. I did what I was told. He sat back down and picked up his glass. The liquid inside was a deep red color. It reminded him of blood. We sent over a full boarding party. 50 soldiers in combat suits. I was the team leader. We cut through the airlock and entered the ship. Everything was dark. Cold. Our suit lights were the only illumination. The cantina had grown quiet again. Even the background noise seemed muted. The first thing we noticed was the smell. Even through our suit filters, we could smell it. Death, decay, something else, something we couldn't identify. Kethver paused and took another drink. His eyes were focused on something far away. We split into teams and began searching the ship. Engineering, medical bay, crew quarters, bridge, everything was empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Just empty rooms and corridors. Where was the crew? Asked the vegan officer. That's what we wanted to know. Our sensors had detected life signs from outside the ship, faint ones, but inside we found nothing, no humans. No bodies, nothing. Kethver's skin was starting to change color again. The young soldiers noticed but didn't comment. We spent 4 hours searching, every room, every compartment, every storage locker. The ship was completely empty. But our external sensors still showed faint life signs. Somewhere, he stood up and began pacing again. The movement helped him think. Then Corporal Vash found something in the engineering section, a hidden compartment, behind a false wall. Inside was a single human, female, unconscious, barely alive. The alien soldiers exchanged glances. They could sense that this was important. We brought her back to our ship. Put her in the medical bay, tried to wake her up. When she finally came around, she told us her name was Marie Foster, chief engineer of the Liberator. She had been hiding in that compartment for 3 weeks. Kethver stopped pacing and looked directly at the young soldiers. Foster told us what had happened. The Liberator had been damaged in the Battle of Procyon. Life support was failing. The crew was dying. Captain Hendricks made a decision. He ordered the surviving crew to abandon ship, but not in escape pods. Then how? Asked the Marduk ensign. They put on their emergency suits and went outside into space. They attached themselves to the hull using magnetic grapples. Then they shut down all the ship's systems. Made it look dead. The room was completely silent now. The young soldiers were trying to understand what they were hearing. The crew had been living on the outside of their ship for 3 months, in hard vacuum, using only their emergency suits and whatever supplies they could carry. They were waiting. Waiting for what? For us, Kethver said simply. They were waiting for someone to board their ship, someone they could capture. He walked back to his chair but didn't sit down. Instead, he stood behind it with his hands on the back. Foster had been left inside to monitor our boarding party, to report back to Captain Hendricks, to tell him when we were all inside the ship, when we were trapped. The young soldiers were beginning to understand. Their faces showed fear and confusion. While we were searching the ship, the human crew was moving around outside. 37 people in spacesuits. They had been practicing for months, learning how to move in zero gravity, how to work together in vacuum. Kethver's voice was getting quieter. The soldiers had to lean forward to hear him. They cut our ship's docking clamps, disabled our engines, took control of our bridge, all while we were still inside their ship. Looking for bodies that weren't there? How many of your people survived? Asked the vegan officer. 12 out of 50. The humans didn't kill us. They captured us, took us prisoner, used us as hostages. Kethver finally sat back down. His shoulders were shaking slightly. Captain Hendricks came aboard our ship after it was secure. He was still wearing his spacesuit, had been for 3 months. He looked at us through his helmet visor and smiled. What did he say? He thanked us for bringing him a new ship. Said his old one was getting uncomfortable. Then he asked if we had any coffee. Said his crew had been drinking recycled water for 3 months and they were getting tired of it. The alien soldiers stared at Kethver. They were trying to process what they had heard. The humans took our ship and disappeared into the nebula. We never saw them again. Command listed the Liberator as destroyed. But I know better. That ship is still out there. Captain Hendricks is still out there, still waiting for someone else to board his ghost ship. Kethver picked up his glass and drained it in one swallow. I learned something important that day. Humans don't die the way other species do. They don't give up. They don't accept defeat. They just find new ways to fight. Even when they're dead, they're still dangerous. He looked around the table at the young faces staring at him. Foster told me something before they released us. She said death was just another tactical option for humans, something to be used when the situation required it. I didn't understand what she meant then. Do you understand now? Asked the Martican sign. Kethver nodded slowly. Yes, I understand now. Humans don't see death as the end of fighting. They see it as the beginning of a different kind of war. Kethver stared at his empty glass for a long time. The young soldiers around the table waited. They had learned not to rush him. His stories came when they came. Pushing would only make him stop talking. Another drink, he called to the serving robot. The machine brought him something stronger this time, something that burned going down. He needed the burn to tell this next story. You think humans are bad when they're defending themselves? He said finally. You think they're dangerous when they're trapped? But that's nothing. Nothing compared to what they do when they decide something can't be allowed to exist. A new soldier had joined their group. A young Rigelian pilot who looked like she had never seen real combat. She raised her hand like she was in school. What do you mean? She asked. Kethver looked at her with tired eyes. I mean, humans have a concept they call scorched earth. When they can't have something, they make sure nobody else can have it either, even if it means destroying everything. He took a long drink from his glass. The liquid was clear, but it left his throat raw. This happened on Kepler 442b, mining. World, rich in rare metals. Both sides wanted it. The coalition had been trying to take it for months. The humans were dug in deep, fighting for every tunnel, every processing plant, every storage facility. The alien soldiers nodded. They had all heard about the mining world campaigns. Brutal fighting in underground tunnels, no room to maneuver, no air support. Just soldiers, with guns in dark holes. Major Alex Turner was in command of human special forces on the planet. He had maybe 200 soldiers. We had 20,000. The math was simple. We would wear them down, force them out, take the planet. Kethver set his glass down and looked around the table. His skin was starting to change color again. Turner had other ideas. His team included Sergeant Danny Brooks, demolitions expert. 24 years old, human male, small guy, quiet. Carried more explosives than most soldiers carried ammunition. Demolitions? Asked the Rigelian pilot. For tunnel fighting? For everything, Kethver said. Brooks could blow up anything. Doors, walls, vehicles, buildings, bridges. If it existed, he could destroy it. That was his job. He picked up his glass again, but didn't drink. Instead, he held it up to the light and watched the liquid move. We had been fighting on Kepler 442b for 6 months? Slow progress. The humans kept falling back deeper into the tunnel systems. We thought we were winning. We thought they were running out of places to hide. The young soldiers were listening carefully. They could tell this story was going to be different from the others. Then we lost contact with Turner's team. Complete radio silence. Our scouts reported that the humans had abandoned their forward positions, left behind weapons, equipment, food, everything. They retreated, asked a Centauri lieutenant. That's what we thought. Command was happy. The humans were finally giving up. We sent teams to secure the abandoned positions. Started moving our heavy equipment forward. Began planning the final assault. Kethver's hands were shaking again. Not much, but enough for the soldiers to notice. 3 days later, our seismic sensors detected something strange, deep underground. Vibrations, like digging, but not normal mining operations, something else. He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the space station continued its slow rotation. Stars moved past in their ancient patterns. Everything looked peaceful. At first, we thought it was residual mining equipment. Automated systems the humans had left running. But the vibrations were getting stronger, deeper, moving toward the planet's core. Kethver turned back to face the group. His expression was grim. Our geologists analyzed the seismic data. They said someone was drilling, using heavy equipment, moving through solid rock at an incredible rate. 20 kilometers down, still going deeper. 20 kilometers? The Rigelian pilot looked confused. Why would anyone dig that deep? That's what we wanted to know. We sent survey teams to investigate, found the drilling site. It was in an abandoned mining complex. The humans had been working there for weeks, maybe months. Kethver sat back down heavily. His chair creaked under his weight. The drilling equipment was human military gear, modified, jury-rigged. Sergeant Brooks had turned mining tools into something else. Something designed to go deeper than any normal operation would require. He picked up his glass and took another long drink. The burn was getting familiar now. We found their equipment logs. Brooks and his team had been taking shifts, drilling, continuously for 72 hours, no breaks, no rest. They had been working in the tunnel while under constant enemy fire from our patrols. The alien soldiers exchanged glances. They were starting to understand that this story was going to be worse than the others. Our engineers studied the drilling pattern, the direction, the depth. They realized what the humans were trying to do. They were drilling toward the planet's mantle, the molten rock beneath the surface. Why? Asked the Centauri lieutenant. To crack it open, Kethver said simply. Brooks had calculated that if he could place his explosives in the right location, he could fracture the planet's crust, trigger massive volcanic activity. Make the entire world uninhabitable. The room went completely silent. Even the background noise from the space station seemed to stop. We sent teams into the tunnels to stop them. The humans were still down. They're still drilling. Brooks had his explosives with him. Nuclear demolition charges, enough to level a city. Kethver's voice was getting quieter. The soldiers had to lean forward to hear him. Major Turner was coordinating the operation from the surface. He knew we were coming. Knew we would try to stop them. He didn't care. His final radio message was broadcast on all frequencies, so everyone could hear it. What did he say? Kethver closed his eyes. He could still hear Turner's voice, calm, professional, completely insane. He said if we couldn't have the planet, nobody could. He said some things were worth destroying. Everything for... Then he activated what he called the Broken Arrow Protocol. The young soldiers didn't understand the reference. Kethver had to explain. Broken Arrow is a human military term. It means a nuclear weapon is lost or out of control. When humans call Broken Arrow, it means something has gone very wrong. Something that can't be fixed. He opened his eyes and looked around the table. All the young faces were staring at him. Turner gave us 1 hour to evacuate the entire planet. All personnel, all equipment, everything. After that, he said, Kepler 442b would become uninhabitable for the next 1,000 years. Did you evacuate? Asked the Rigelian pilot. We tried. But an hour isn't enough time to move 20,000 soldiers. We got maybe half our people off the surface. The rest were still loading transports when Brooks detonated his charges. Kethver stood up and walked back to the window. He pressed his hand against the cold glass. The explosion was like nothing I had ever seen. The ground split open. Magma erupted from dozens of locations. The atmosphere caught fire. The entire planet became a ball of molten rock. How many died? 12,000 coalition soldiers, all the human forces, every living thing on the planet. Brooks and Turner died with their bombs. They stayed at the detonation site to make sure the charges went off properly. The alien soldiers sat in shocked silence. They were trying to process what they had heard. We monitored the planet for months afterward. The volcanic activity continued for years. The surface temperature reached over 2,000 degrees. Nothing could survive there. Nothing would ever survive there again. Kethver turned away from the window. His skin had gone completely pale. Command wanted to know why. Why would humans destroy something so valuable? Turner had left a final message, recorded just before the detonation. What did it say? Kethver sat back down and picked up his glass. His hands were shaking badly now. Turner said war wasn't about winning or losing. It was about making sure your enemies paid the right price for their victories. He said if we wanted Kepler 442b, we could have it. But we would get exactly what we deserved. He drained his glass in one swallow and called for another, a dead world, useless to everyone. That was our prize for defeating the humans. That was Turner's final gift to us. The young soldiers stared at their drinks. None of them felt like talking anymore. That's when I learned the most important thing about fighting humans, Kethver said quietly. They don't just fight to win. They fight to make sure you lose, even if it costs them everything. Kethver had stopped counting his drinks. The young soldiers around the table were quiet now. They had heard 3 stories about human warfare, each one worse than the last. But they kept listening. They needed to know what they might face someday. The cantina was getting darker. The space station had moved into the shadow of a planet. Through the windows, only distant stars provided light. It felt appropriate for what Kethver was about to tell them. You think humans are bad when they're alive? He said slowly. When they're healthy and thinking clearly. But that's not when they're most dangerous. Humans are most dangerous when they should be dead. A young Altarian medic looked confused. Dead soldiers can't fight, Kethver laughed. It was a bitter sound. That's what every sane species believes. We were wrong about that too. He pushed his empty glass away and called for water instead. His head was starting to hurt, but he needed to tell this story. The young soldiers needed to hear it. This happened on New Geneva, human colony world. Pretty place, green forests, clean rivers, nice cities. The kind of world you want to retire to after the war. The alien soldiers nodded. They had all seen pictures of human colony worlds, peaceful places. Hard to imagine them as battlefields. We had been fighting there for 2 months. The humans were losing ground every day. Most of their military forces had been evacuated. Only medical units remained. Doctors, nurses, field hospitals treating wounded civilians. Cuthbert drank his water slowly. It tasted clean after all the alcohol. It helped him think clearly. My unit was ordered to secure the main hospital in the capital city. Intelligence said there were still human military personnel inside, wounded soldiers, medical staff. Maybe 50 people total. That doesn't sound dangerous, said the Altarian medic. Medical units aren't supposed to be dangerous, Kethver agreed. International law protects doctors and nurses. Even in war, you don't attack hospitals. But humans don't follow normal rules. He set his water glass down carefully. His hands was steadier now. The hospital was an old building, 5 stories tall, thick walls, designed to withstand natural disasters. The humans had been using it to treat wounded for months. Our intelligence said they had maybe 20 soldiers inside, all of them badly injured. The young soldiers were listening carefully. They could tell this story was going to be different from the others. Dr. Kevin Walsh was in charge of the medical unit, 43 years old, human male. He had been a military doctor for 20 years, seen every kind of injury possible. Very experienced with trauma surgery. Kethver paused and looked around the table. The alien faces were focused on him. Sergeant Linda Stone was commanding the security detail, 31 years old, human female. She had been wounded in the fighting outside the city. Serious injuries. Should have been evacuated weeks earlier. Why wasn't she evacuated? Asked the vegan communications officer. Because she refused to leave, Kethver said simply. Stone said her job was to protect the medical staff. She would stay until the last doctor was evacuated. He picked up his water glass again but didn't drink. Instead, he held it and watched the condensation run down the sides. We surrounded the hospital at dawn. Standard procedure, called for surrender. Offered safe passage for all medical personnel. The humans had 2 hours to comply. The young soldiers nodded. This sounded like normal military operations, nothing unusual. Dr. Walsh responded on the radio. Very polite, very professional. He said his people needed more time. They had patients who couldn't be moved. Surgery in progress. People who would die if treatment was interrupted. Kethera's skin was starting to change color again. The soldiers had learned this meant the story was about to get worse. We gave them 6 more hours. Walsh kept asking for more time. Always very reasonable, always explaining why delay was necessary. Someone was having surgery. Someone else was in critical condition. Always something. Did you wait? Asked the Altarian medic. We waited 12 hours total. Then command ordered us to take the building. We went in through all entrances at once. Expected to find doctors and nurses treating patients. What we found was something else. Kethver set his glass down and stood up. He needed to move around for this part of the story. The first floor looked normal. Hospital beds, medical equipment. But no patients, no doctors, no nurses. Just empty rooms. That smelled like medicine and something else. Something wrong. He began pacing slowly around the table. The young soldiers turned to watch him. We found the first body on the 2nd floor. Human soldier, male, multiple gunshot wounds. He had been dead for days, but he was sitting upright. In a chair, holding a rifle, pointing it at the stairway. The room was getting very quiet. Even the background noise from the space station seemed muted. At first we thought it was a sick joke. Humans using their dead as scarecrows. Psychological warfare. But when we got closer, we realized the body was connected to machines, tubes, wires, electronic devices. Kethver stopped pacing and looked directly at the young medic. Dr. Walsh had been experimenting. Using medical technology to keep dead. Soldiers functional, he called it the Lazarus Protocol. Bringing people back from the dead. That's impossible, the medic said. Dead tissue can't function. Dead tissue can't, Kethver agreed. But Dr. Walsh wasn't using tissue, he was using machines, artificial blood, electrical stimulation, combat drugs, computer-controlled nervous systems. The alien soldiers stared at him. They were trying to understand what they were hearing. We found 12 more bodies on the upper floors, all of them dead, all of them still fighting. Walsh had connected them to life support machines. Given them artificial hearts? Artificial lungs? Computer programs that controlled their movements. Kethver sat back down heavily. His chair creaked under his weight. The worst part was Sergeant Stone. We found her in the command center. She had been clinically dead for 6 hours. Massive. Head trauma, but she was still giving orders, still coordinating the defense. How? Asked the vegan officer. Walsh had connected her brain to a computer system. Her body was dead, but her mind was still functional. She could think, talk, make decisions, control the other dead soldiers through radio commands. The young soldiers were silent. They were trying to process what they were hearing. Stone looked at us when we entered the room. Her eyes were still alive, even though the rest of her was dead. She smiled and asked if we wanted to surrender. Kethver picked up his water glass and drained it in one swallow. The fighting lasted for 6 more hours. The dead soldiers didn't feel pain, didn't get tired, didn't run out of ammunition because they had been modified to use any weapon they could find, including their own bodies. Their bodies? Walsh had turned the dead soldiers into walking weapons. Explosive implants, poison gas dispensers, acid sprayers. When they ran out of bullets, they became the bullets. The alien soldiers exchanged horrified glances. They were beginning to understand why Kethver looked so haunted. We lost 30 soldiers taking that hospital. Against an enemy that was already dead? Stone kept fighting until Walsh's machines finally broke down. Even then, she tried to activate a self-destruct device with her last breath. Kethver called for another drink, something strong again. He needed it after telling that story. When we finally secured the building, we found Walsh in the basement. He was performing surgery on himself, trying to implement the Lazarus Protocol on his own body before we could capture him. Did he succeed? Partially. We found him 3 days later. Dead, but still moving, still trying to complete his work. He had connected himself to the hospital's power grid. As long as there was electricity, he would keep working. The young soldiers sat in shocked silence. They were trying to imagine fighting an enemy that couldn't die. We had to destroy the entire hospital, burned it to the ground. It was the only way to make sure Walsh's experiments were completely eliminated. Kethver received his new drink and took a long swallow. The alcohol burned away the taste of those memories. That's when I learned the most terrifying thing about humans. They don't accept death as defeat. They see it as just another tactical problem to solve, another obstacle to overcome. He looked around the table at the young faces staring at him. Dr. Walsh left detailed notes about his experiments. The Lazarus Protocol. Command classified everything, but I read the files. Walsh had been working on the project for months. He believed death was just a temporary medical condition. What happened to his research? Asked the Altarian medic. Kethver's expression grew even darker. That's classified, but I'll tell you this much. The war ended 2 years later. Humans won. And they never used the Lazarus Protocol again. Why not? Because they didn't need to. The threat was enough. Every species in the galaxy knew that humans had found a way to make death irrelevant. Who wants to fight an enemy that can turn your victories into their reinforcements? The young soldiers stared at their drinks. None of them felt like talking anymore. Walsh's final log entry was very simple, Kethver said quietly. He wrote that death was just another wound to treat, and humans are very good at treating wounds. Kethver sat quietly for a long time after finishing his 4th story. The young soldiers around the table were silent too. They had heard about humans using poison, deception, destruction, and even death as weapons. But they could see in his eyes that he had one more story to tell. The worst one. The cantina was almost empty now. Other customers had left. Even the serving robots seemed to move more quietly. Outside the windows, the space station continued its slow rotation through the void. But inside, time seemed to have stopped. "There's one more story," Kethver said. Finally, his voice was barely above a whisper, the last one. The one that ended the war. A new soldier had joined their group. A young Andromedian officer who had arrived on the latest transport. She looked fresh out of the academy. Clean uniform, shiny insignia. She had no idea what she was about to hear. This story takes place. At the very end, Kethver continued. When humans were losing everywhere. When their fleets were destroyed. Their colonies captured. Their armies scattered. When everyone thought the war was over. He called for one final drink. The strongest thing the cantina served. He would need it to tell this story properly. Haven's Edge was a small colony world on the frontier. Nothing special about it, no rare metals. No strategic importance. Just farmers and miners trying to make a living, the kind of place wars usually ignore. The alien soldiers leaned forward. They could tell this story was going to be different from all the others. But Haven's Edge had one thing that made it important. It was the last human military. Base still operating. Colonel Pete Mitchell was in command. Maybe 300 soldiers total. They had been cut off for months. No supplies, no reinforcements, no way to escape. Kethver received his drink and held it without drinking. The glass was cold against his skin. My fleet was sent to capture the base. Standard operation. We had overwhelming numbers. 5,000. Soldiers, heavy weapons, air support. The humans had no chance of winning. He finally took a sip of his drink. It burned worse than anything he had tasted all night. Captain Rose Martinez was Mitchell's second in command. 38 years old, human female. She had been an engineer before the war. Specialized in reactor systems and power generation. The young soldiers nodded. They were getting used to Kethver's pattern. He always introduced the key humans before explaining what they did. We surrounded the base and called for surrender. Standard procedure. Mitchell responded immediately. Very polite, very professional. He said his people needed time to discuss terms. Kethver set his glass down and looked around the table. All the young faces were watching him intently. We gave them 24 hours. Then Mitchell called back. He said they had reached a decision. They would not surrender. But they had a counter-proposal. What kind of proposal? Asked the Andromedian officer. Mitchell said we could have the planet, all of it. But only if we were willing to pay the right price. He gave us coordinates. Told us to scan those locations with our most sensitive instruments. Kethver's skin was changing color again. This time it went completely white. Our sensors detected massive energy readings underground all across the planet. Fusion reactors, dozens of them, all connected by a network of cables and transmission lines. The alien soldiers exchanged worried glances. They were beginning to understand that this story was going to be worse than all the others. Captain Martinez had been busy for months, converting the planet's power grid into something else. Something that had never been built before. A weapon that could destroy everything within 12 light years. 12 light years? The Andromedian officer looked confused. That's impossible. No weapon has that much range. Most weapons don't, Kethver agreed. But Martinez hadn't built a normal weapon. She had built a chain reaction device. Something that would trigger the planet's core to explode like a star. He picked up his glass and took another drink. His hands were shaking badly now. Our scientists analyzed Martinez's design. The calculations were correct. If she detonated all those fusion reactors at once, the planet would go supernova. The explosion would destroy everything in the surrounding star systems. The room was completely silent. Even the background noise from the space station had stopped. Mitchell explained the situation very calmly. He called it the last stand protocol. If we attacked his base, Martinez would trigger the chain reaction. The planet would explode. Our entire fleet would be destroyed, along with several other star systems. Kethver stood up and walked to the window. Outside, stars moved slowly past. Beautiful and peaceful, but he knew how quickly they could become weapons. He gave us a choice: withdraw our forces and leave the system completely, or stay and watch 12 light-years of space become an expanding ball of plasma. Did you believe him? Asked the young vegan officer. At first, no. It seemed too extreme, even for humans. But our intelligence teams had been studying human behavior for years. They said Mitchell was serious. If we attacked, he would destroy everything. Kethver turned back to face the group. His expression was grim. Command didn't want to withdraw. We were winning the war. This was supposed to be the final battle, but the risk was too great. If Mitchell was telling the truth, we would lose more than just our fleet. He sat back down heavily. The chair groaned under his weight. We sent negotiators to the planet, tried to find a compromise. Mitchell was very reasonable, very friendly. He offered to give us a tour of Martinez's work, show us exactly how the chain reaction would function. Did you take the tour? 3 of our best scientists went down to the surface. Mitchell and Martinez showed them everything. The reactor network, the trigger mechanisms, the computer programs that would coordinate the detonation. Kethver picked up his glass but set it down without drinking. His stomach couldn't handle any more alcohol. Our scientists confirmed that the system would work. Martinez had turned an entire planet into a bomb. If triggered, it would explode with the force of a small star. The blast wave would travel at light speed. There would be no escape. The young soldiers stared at him in horror. They were trying to imagine the scale of destruction Martinez had planned. The worst part was how calm the humans were about it. Mitchell gave our negotiators coffee and showed them family pictures. Martinez explained her engineering work like she was discussing a school project. What did they want? Asked the Andromedian officer. Nothing, Kethver said simply. They didn't want territory. They didn't want prisoner exchanges. They didn't want peace negotiations. They just wanted us to leave, forever. He stood up again and began pacing. The movement helped him think through the memories. Mitchell's final message was broadcast on all frequencies. Every ship in the fleet heard it. Every command post in the sector. He said some things were worth dying for. Some things were worth killing for. And some things were worth taking the whole universe with you for. Did you withdraw? We had no choice. Command ordered a full retreat. Every ship, every soldier. We abandoned the entire star system. Left it to 300 humans who were willing to become a supernova rather than surrender. Kethver stopped pacing and looked directly at the young soldiers. But here's the truly terrifying part. After we withdrew, the humans didn't trigger their device. They just sat there, waiting, guarding a weapon that could destroy everything within 12 light years. They're still there? Asked the vegan. Officer, as far as I know, yes. Mitchell and Martinez and their 300 soldiers, still sitting on a planet-sized bomb, still willing to use it if anyone threatens them. The alien soldiers sat in stunned silence. They were trying to process the implications of what they had heard. That's when the war ended, Kethver continued. Not because humans surrendered, not because we defeated them, but because they had proven they were willing to destroy everything rather than lose. He picked up his glass and drained it completely. The alcohol burned his throat, but he didn't care anymore. Every species in the galaxy learned the same lesson that day. You can fight humans, you can beat them in battles, you can capture their territory, but you can never really defeat them. Because they will always find a way to make victory cost more than defeat. Kethver sat back down and looked around the table one final time. Mitchell's last words to our fleet were very simple. He said we could come back anytime we wanted. But we should remember that Haven's Edge would always be ready to give us exactly what we deserved. The young soldiers stared at their drinks. None of them would sleep well tonight. And that, Kethver said quietly, is why humans won the war. Not because they were stronger, not because they were smarter, but because they were willing to pay any price, including the price of everything that exists.